This monitor right here is one of the best monitors that money can buy when you care about being good at first-person shooters. 390Hz might sound a bit unnecessary at first, but I can tell you already that it looks awesome, especially in combination with backlight strobing. And this is an IPS panel, meaning we actually get a good-looking image. So this really makes you wonder why some manufacturers even continue to make monitors with TN panels. I mean, yeah, high-end TNs are still extremely fast, and it's what's being used by pros for like a decade now. But monitors like this really make you think it's time to move on. Of course, we'll compare response time numbers and all that good stuff in a bit. But first, I want to let you know that Acer provided the monitor for the purpose of this review. But of course, they don't get any input on this video whatsoever. Now, the panel that's being used here actually is somewhat well known and can be found in some other monitors as well. It's the M250HAN03.0 by AU Optronics. Typically, it's clocked at 360Hz, but here we can enable a 390Hz mode in the OSD. It's not really a big deal, but yeah. 3 Hz, why not take them? Now, just from looking at this monitor, it's pretty clear that it's all about the 390Hz panel and not about the design. The backside looks exactly like most Acer monitors did many years ago, and the stand is pretty basic as well. But it's functional, and I kinda like the sleek appearance. There's plenty of room for height and tilt adjustment. Pivot though is locked. I really like that Acer went for a single base design instead of legs, which often can get in the way of your mouse. Compared to a Zowie monitor though, the design is not as thought out because it's not possible to swivel the base away from the mouse to get it out of the way, which makes it a bit more difficult to go full try-hard mode. But when it comes to response times, motion blur and the overall gaming performance, I have to say that I'm genuinely impressed. I mean, I've heard so many good things about this monitor already, so I kinda expected amazing results, but actually seeing it with my own eyes is a different story. To show you what it looks like, we'll be using Blurbuster's pursued camera technique, and we'll also go over some response time heat maps in a bit. Now, when FreeSync is turned off, we get 3 different levels of overdrive, though having FreeSync set to on unfortunately blocks the overdrive control, and we're left with this. But this looks extremely good already, so I'm not too mad about that. With FreeSync turned off, there's only little room for improvement. The overall fastest and best setting is the normal mode here, which only looks ever so slightly better than the FreeSync setting. It's definitely easier to see with faster UFO speeds. And switching to a 1440 pixels per second speed target has some other benefits for comparing different refresh rates, so we're gonna stick to that for now. So yeah, this shows a bit more clearly that we get the best performance with the overdrive set to normal, and therefore this is the mode you should be using when playing games like CSGO or Valorant and can maintain more than 390 FPS. If that's not the case and your FPS are usually a good bit below 390, I'd suggest using the FreeSync mode instead. This also works decent at other refresh rates, though if you for some reason want to be using this monitor below 144Hz, you gotta put the overdrive to off instead, which is not great because that means we're giving up adaptive sync below 144Hz, which would be a good feature to have, especially at those lower frame rates. Adaptive sync really gets progressively more useful the lower the refresh rate gets, so it's a shame that we basically have to deactivate this feature below 144Hz in favor of fixing the overshoot. For a monitor like this though, I don't think that's too big of an issue, because let's face it, you're not buying a 390Hz monitor like this to play a lot of low frame rate story-based games anyway. It would be cool if this monitor had the flexibility to handle those games better, but to be fair, a monitor like this is best used to its full potential with high frame rate games and uncapped FPS anyway. And when used at 390Hz in its best overdrive mode, the response times are pretty good. Keep in mind that these are gamma-corrected results and that I'm using a pretty strict testing methodology. Also, it's not really surprising that we don't even come close to full refresh rate compliance, since the refresh rate window at 390Hz is only about 2.5 milliseconds. With this strict testing methodology, this is pretty hard to achieve. By the way, I usually share additional response time measurements and other stuff that doesn't make it into the videos on my Patreon. I've got the link down below in case you want to check that out and support my channel. Now the 240Hz numbers even look a bit better. And I've tested a few 240Hz monitors before, so this is something we can compare. At 240Hz, the Acer is about as fast as the XV252QF from AOC, which is a native 240Hz IPS. But we're getting a good bit less overshoot with the Acer, which of course is nice. If we compare that to the fastest monitor I've ever tested, which also happens to be one of the fastest monitors in existence, it's pretty obvious that TN monitors like the X25 still have the edge over IPS when it comes to pure response times performance. So should you just get a 240Hz TN monitor like the X25 instead? Probably not. Of course, there are the well-known drawbacks of TN when it comes to image quality, but also take a look at this. The Acer has slower response times than the X25, so we can see more smearing behind the UFO, but the motion clarity we're getting thanks to that 390Hz refresh rate kinda makes up for that. So it's easier to see finer details like the pattern in the UFO's body. And with the Acer, we also get a backlight strobing mode at the full 390Hz refresh rate, which is pretty mind-blowing. With that in mind, I'd actually prefer the 390Hz Acer for fast-paced gaming over a good 240Hz TN monitor. And for some more reference, here's what good 240Hz IPS monitors look like in comparison. But let's get back to that backlight strobing mode for a minute. With this monitor, VRB actually makes sense to use because Acer did a pretty decent job here. To be honest, on this monitor this even is my favorite mode for FPS games, which rarely ever happens. But here, the strobing is actually good. Now first up, VRB does a pretty good job in reducing motion blur, even in the normal setting. Then, Acer let us combine VRB with overdrive, which of course is nice. And with that super high refresh rate of 390Hz, crosstalk is much less noticeable than with lower refresh rate strobing, even when things are moving pretty fast. Also, crosstalk towards the top and bottom of the screen is really minimal. And to top it all off, I have to say that I even find the 390Hz strobing to be easier on the eyes than other strobing modes that work at lower refresh rates. Now it's kinda hard to compare this to the 144Hz strobing mode of the X25 because of the refresh rate difference. With the 390Hz panel, we obviously get a lot more ghost images thanks to the much higher frequency. But even at higher panning speeds, they're not very noticeable because they don't really trail far behind the original image. So I actually prefer what the Acer does here. Also, the XV252QF can maintain a far higher brightness even in its most extreme strobing mode. It's definitely one of the brightest monitors out there when it comes to backlight strobing. In its weakest VRB setting, it does a whopping 471 nits, which is insanely bright for backlight strobing. One thing I don't like though is that the brightness isn't adjustable when VRB is on. Or to be a bit more precise, it is adjustable, but only with a stupid workaround. After changing the brightness, you have to turn off the max brightness setting, then turn on VRB and re-enable the max brightness option. Full credit to Optimum Tech for sharing this workaround. Of course, this is still far better than having no brightness adjustment at all, but I have no idea why Acer made it that complicated. Speaking of brightness, outside of the VRB mode, we're getting a max brightness of over 440 nits. The minimum brightness doesn't go below 100 nits, which definitely is on the higher side. Ideally, this would be adjustable down to about 50 nits or lower. And just for the record, the HDR mode doesn't increase the maximum brightness. Now, this is not a monitor that you'll be buying mainly for content consumption, but it's actually pretty decent for that. The contrast ratio is almost 1200 to 1, which is higher than what we typically get with IPS panels. Colors also look vibrant and saturated. This also greatly helps with visibility in-game. It has a color gamut volume of about 1.4 times as large as sRGB, meaning most content and games will look oversaturated. And that's a good thing for first-person shooters, because this makes it easier to spot enemies. If you like to use tools to increase the color vibrance, this will also give you better results than a monitor with a smaller color gamut volume, because there's just much more headroom to work with. Now, color accuracy totally isn't the main concern with a monitor like this, but I'm pretty happy to report that Acer did a really good job here. With just a few simple tweaks, we get great results. And unsurprisingly, that improves even further after full calibration and profiling. It's really impressive that a monitor like this could be used for professional color work when calibrated. It even comes with an sRGB mode that actually doesn't suck. Only the white point is slightly off, but I really wouldn't hesitate to use this for hobby photo or video editing without additional calibration. Which is kinda amazing if you consider that this basically is an esports monitor. So should you take your 240Hz TN monitor and throw it right out of the window? Now, for competitive gaming, this is more of a side grade than a true upgrade if you're already coming from a high-end 240Hz TN, at least when it comes to pure motion performance, so the stuff that lets you hit and track moving targets better. A good 240Hz TN and this 390Hz IPS are really trading blows in that regard. Though if you can't take the inconsistent, dull and bad-looking image of your TN anymore, then yeah, this might be the upgrade you're looking for. In comparison to some TN monitors, you'd be losing a bit when it comes to pure response times performance, but in my opinion, that's easily made up for by the increased motion sharpness, especially in the VRB mode. And to top it all off, the image quality is just way better, which also makes it easier to spot your opponents in-game. So if you're in the market and thinking about getting a 240Hz TN, I'd probably go for this monitor instead. Of course, I've got a link down below if you'd like to check it out, as well as most of the other stuff I have on my desk. Thanks for watching, man sieht sich im nächsten Video.